Fabre's Book of Insects. Chapter 1. My Work and My Workshop. We all have our own talents, our special gifts. Sometimes these gifts seem to come to us from our forefathers, but more often it is difficult to trace their origin. A goat herder, perhaps, amuses himself by counting little pebbles and doing sums with them. He becomes an astoundingly quick reckoner, and in the end is a professor of mathematics. Another boy, at an age when most of us care only for play, leaves his schoolfellows at their games and listens to the imaginary sounds of an organ, a secret concert heard by him alone. He has a genius for music. A third, so small perhaps that he cannot eat his bread and jam without smearing his face, takes a keen delight in fashioning clay into little figures that are amazingly lifelike. If he be fortunate, he will someday be a famous sculptor. To talk about oneself is hateful, I know, but perhaps I may be allowed to do so for a moment in order to introduce myself and my studies. From my earliest childhood, I have felt drawn towards the things of nature. It would be ridiculous to suppose that this gift, this love of observing plants and insects, was inherited from my ancestors, who were uneducated people of the soil and observed little but their own cows and sheep. Of my 4 grandparents, only one ever opened a book, and even he was very uncertain about his spelling. Nor do I owe anything to a scientific training. Without masters, without guides, often without books, I have gone forward with one aim always before me: to add a few pages to the history of insects. As I look back, so many years back, I can see myself as a tiny boy, extremely proud of my first braces and of my attempts to learn the alphabet. And very well, I remember the delight of finding my first bird's nest and gathering my first mushroom. One day I was climbing a hill. At the top of it was a row of trees that had long interested me very much. From the little window at home, I could see them against the sky, tossing before the wind or writhing madly in the snow, and I wished to have a closer view of them. It was a long climb, ever so long, and my legs were very short. I clambered up slowly and tediously, for the grassy slope was as steep as a roof. Suddenly, at my feet, a lovely bird flew out from its hiding place under a big stone. In a moment I had found the nest, which was made of hair and fine straw, and had 6 eggs laid side by side in it. The eggs were a magnificent azure blue, very bright. This was the first nest I ever found, the first of the many joys which the birds were to bring me. Overpowered with pleasure, I lay down on the grass and stared at it. Meanwhile, the mother bird was flying about uneasily from stone to stone, crying tack, tack, in a voice of the greatest anxiety. I was too small to understand what she was suffering. I made a plan worthy of a little beast of prey. I would carry away just one of the pretty blue eggs as a trophy, and then, in a fortnight, I would come back and take the tiny birds before they could fly away. Fortunately, as I walked carefully home, carrying my blue egg on a bed of moss, I met the priest. "Ah," said he, "a saxicola's egg. Where did you get it?" I told him the whole story. "I shall go back for the others," I said, "when the young birds have got their quill feathers." "Oh, but you mustn't do that," cried the priest. "You mustn't be so cruel as to rob the poor mother of all her little birds. Be a good boy now, and promise not to touch the nest." From this conversation, I learned 2 things. First, that robbing birds' nests is cruel, and secondly, that birds and beasts have names just like ourselves. What are the names of all my friends in the woods and meadows? I asked myself, and what does saxicola mean? Years later, I learned that saxicola means an inhabitant of the rocks. My bird with the blue eggs was a stone chat. Below our village, there ran a little brook, and beyond the brook was a spinney of beeches with smooth, straight trunks like pillars. The ground was padded with moss. It was in this spinney that I picked my first mushroom, which looked, when I caught sight of it, like an egg dropped on the moss by some wandering hen. There were many others there, of different sizes, forms, and colors. Some were shaped like bells, some like extinguishers, some like cups. Some were broken, and were weeping tears of milk. Some became blue when I trod on them. Others, the most curious of all, were like pears with a round hole at the top, a sort of chimney whence a whiff of smoke escaped when I prodded their underside with my finger. I filled my pockets with these and made them smoke at my leisure, till at last they were reduced to a kind of tinder. Many a time I returned to that delightful spinney and learned my first lessons in mushroom lore in the company of the crows. My collections, I need hardly say, were not admitted to the house. In this way, by observing nature and making experiments, nearly all my lessons have been learnt, all except two, in fact. I have received from others 2 lessons of a scientific character, and 2 only in the whole course of my life, one in anatomy and one in chemistry. I owe the first to the learned naturalist Moquintandon, who showed me how to explore the interior of a snail in a plate filled with water. The lesson was short and fruitful. My first introduction to chemistry was less fortunate. It ended in the bursting of a glass vessel, with the result that most of my fellow pupils were hurt. One of them nearly lost his sight. The lecturer's clothes were burnt to pieces, and the wall of the lecture room was splashed with stains. Later on, when I returned to that room, no longer as a pupil, but as a master, the splashes were still there. On that occasion, I learned one thing at least. Ever after, when I made experiments of that kind, I kept my pupils at a distance. It has always been my great desire to have a laboratory in the open fields. Not an easy thing to obtain when one lives in a state of constant anxiety about one's daily bread. For 40 years, it was my dream to own a little bit of land, fenced in for the sake of privacy, a desolate, barren, sun-scorched bit of land, overgrown with thistles and much beloved by wasps and bees. Here, without fear of interruption, I might question the hunting wasps and others of my friends in that difficult language which consists of experiments and observations. Here, without the long expeditions and rambles that use up my time and strength, I might watch my insects at every hour of the day. And then at last my wish was fulfilled. I obtained a bit of land in the solitude of a little village. It was a harmas, which is the name we give in this part of province to an untilled, pebbly expanse where hardly any plant but time can grow. It is too poor to be worth the trouble of plowing, but the sheep pass there in spring, when it has chanced to rain and a little grass grows up. My own particular harmas, however, had a small quantity of red earth mixed with the stones, and had been roughly cultivated. I was told that vines once grew here, and I was sorry, for the original vegetation had been driven out by the 3-pronged fork. There was no thyme left, nor lavender, nor a single clump of the dwarf oak. As thyme and lavender might be useful to me as a hunting ground for bees and wasps, I was obliged to plant them again. There were plenty of weeds, couch grass, and prickly centauries, and the fierce Spanish oyster plant, with its spreading orange flowers and spikes strong as nails. Above it towered the Illyrian cotton thistle, whose straight and solitary stalk grows sometimes to the height of 6 feet and ends in large pink tufts. There were smaller thistles too, so well armed that the plant collector can hardly tell where to grasp them, and spiky knapweeds, and in among them, in long lines provided with hooks, the shoots of the blue dewberry creeping along the ground. If you had visited this prickly thicket without wearing high boots, you would have paid dearly for your rashness. Such was the Eden that I won by 40 years of desperate struggle. This curious, barren paradise of mine is the happy hunting ground of countless bees and wasps. Never have I seen so large a population of insects at a single spot. All the trades have made it their center. Here come hunters of every kind of game, builders in clay, cotton weavers, leaf cutters, architects in pasteboard, plasterers mixing mortar, carpenters boring wood, miners digging underground galleries, workers in gold beater's skin, and many more. See, here is a tailor bee. She scrapes the cobwebby stalk of the yellow-flowered centaury and gathers a ball of wadding which she carries off proudly with her mandibles or jaws. She will turn it, underground, into cotton satchels to hold the store of honey and the eggs. And here are the leaf-cutting bees, carrying their black, white, or blood-red reaping brushes under their bodies. They will visit the neighboring shrubs, and they're cut from the leaves oval pieces in which to wrap their harvest. Here, too, are the black, velvet-clad mason bees, who work with cement and gravel. We could easily find specimens of their masonry on the stones in the harmas. Next comes a kind of wild bee who stacks her cells in the winding staircase of an empty snail shell, and another who lodges her grubs in the pith of a dry bramble stalk, and a third who uses the channel of a cut reed, and a fourth who lives rent-free in the vacant galleries of some mason bee. There are also bees with horns and bees with brushes on their hind legs to be used for reaping. While the walls of my harmas were being built, some great heaps of stones and mounds of sand were scattered here and there by the builders and were soon occupied by a variety of inhabitants. The mason bees chose the chinks between the stones for their sleeping place. The powerful-eyed lizard, who, when hard-pressed, attacks both man and dog, selected a cave in which to lie in wait for the passing scarab or sacred beetle. The black-eared chat, who looks like a Dominican monk in his white and black raiment, sat on the top stone singing his brief song. His nest, with the sky-blue eggs, must have been somewhere in the heap. When the stones were moved, the little Dominican moved too. I regret him. He would have been a charming neighbor. The eyed lizard I do not regret at all. The sand heaps sheltered a colony of digger wasps and hunting wasps, who were, to my sorrow, turned out at last by the builders. But still there are hunters left, some who flutter about in search of caterpillars, and one very large kind of wasp who actually has the courage to hunt the tarantula. Many of these mighty spiders have their burrows in the harmas, and you can see their eyes gleaming at the bottom of the den like little diamonds. On hot summer afternoons, you may also see Amazon ants, who leave their barracks in long battalions and march far afield to hunt for slaves. Nor are these all. The shrubs about the house are full of birds, warblers and greenfinches, sparrows and owls, while the pond is so popular with the frogs that in May it becomes a deafening orchestra. And boldest of all, the wasp has taken possession of the house itself. On my doorway lives the white-banded sphex. When I go indoors, I must be careful not to tread upon her as she carries on her work of mining. Just within a closed window, a kind of mason wasp has made her earth-built nest upon the freestone wall. To enter her home, she uses a little hole left by accident in the shutters. On the moldings of the Venetian blinds, a few stray mason bees build their cells. The common wasp and the solitary wasp visit me at dinner. The object of their visit, apparently, is to see if my grapes are ripe. Such are my companions. My dear beasts, my friends of former days and other more recent acquaintances, are all here, hunting and building and feeding their families. And if I wish for change, the mountain is close to me, with its tangle of arbutus and rock roses and heather, where wasps and bees delight to gather. And that is why I deserted the town for the village, and came to Serignan to weed my turnips and water my lettuces.